Here we are. So we are currently live, Prof. Ng.
Yes. Good
So
afternoon.
first and foremost, thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday afternoon. Um, we really appreciate you making time, and we're also looking forward to the interesting topic that we have today on risk communication. It's something relatively novel for most of us here, I think, and so we are looking forward to it. If you don't mind, I would love to introduce you to um, our our guests or our audience here today. Um, it is about 3 o'clock, so we have Prof. Ng Kwan Hong with us today, and he has made headlines actually in the past couple of years, having won the Mary Sklodowska Curie Award in 2018 as well as the Merdeka Award just last year. Um, Part of his talk today is based on his experience being a consultant or a panelist in the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a UN organization that was involved in managing risk communication during the Fukushima um, disaster. So, Prof. Ng is actually a medical physicist by profession, but also a risk communication practitioner, as he humbly calls himself. And so today, Prof. Ng will be taking us through the impacts of risk communication and the key lessons learned from Fukushima. He'll also be sharing some recommendations, for how we can have more transparent, timely, clear, trusted, and factually correct risk communication, and so that we could, develop and practice them and apply them, during future crises. So, Prof. Ng, I have sat through some of your talks previously, and what struck me was that you usually approached even the most scientific subjects with some nuances of philosophy, which seems to give it, a more wholesome perspective. So, I'm definitely looking forward to approaching this topic of risk communication with a bit of that approach, I suppose. And so, I would love to hear from you, and perhaps, I mean, you may know that, for some of us millennials here, we only know bits and pieces of what happened in the Fukushima disaster. And so we would really appreciate it if you could help walk us through a little bit about what happened at that time and how you became involved in the aspect of risk communication in this crisis.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much to Dr. Felicita from the Young Scientist Network of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia for inviting me and hosting this session on what lessons we could learn from Fukushima, particularly from the risk communication perspective. Let me turn on my slides first.
Yes, perhaps you can share it first with us.
Yeah.
If you could share the slides, and then, yeah, there we
Okay.
go.
Right. Welcome my colleagues and friends from Malaysia and neighboring countries as well. Uh, I would like to talk about what lessons we can learn from the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident, the disaster, particularly from the risk communication aspect, which is a very important lesson for us, particularly as we are confronting the global problem that is the pandemic. So we talked about the radiation, it conjures up various images like nuclear war, poison environment, cancer, birth defects, genetic mutations, and even the destruction of human race. And you can see the mushroom cloud from the atomic bomb dropped in Japan, and on the left we see that ruined of the one in Hiroshima being bombed and various human sufferings. And the bottom right is what's happening now, the so-called decontamination of various villages near Fukushima to get rid of the radioactive topsoil. And most of us will remember what happened in 2011 in Fukushima. Uh, with various nuclear power plant disaster, earliest major one was the 3 Mile Island in the United States in 79, and then the Chernobyl in 1986. I was fairly young, just entering my career when Chernobyl accident happened. So we always think about the various disasters or accidents in the past. Now, let me start off, Felicita, to tell you the scenario. Well, let's assume what happened. Fukushima nuclear power plant, called accident, some call it disaster, depend what perspective. And it's on March 11, 2011 in the afternoon. The earthquake started first, 9.0 on the Richter scale. It's huge. Now, Fukushima is on the northeast of Tokyo. It's about 400 kilometer. Very interesting prefecture and the various villages, very agricultural. And after the earthquake, the tsunami followed, and they sort of huge wave, something like 10 to 14 meter tall, and swept the various villages and towns along the coast. And then it affected 3 nuclear power plants. And we always call it Daiichi, right? It means the number one, right? In Japanese, the one that affected most. And then about 15,000 lives were lost, swept away by the wave, the earthquake, and so on. And thousands more were injured and still declared missing until today. And they were evacuated, and all that a sequence of events follow. So this is what happened. You can see on this map, right? The earthquake, magnitude 9, and then the Fukushima Daiichi, right? It means the reactor number 1. Okay? And the color indicate the various radiation level then at the beginning, and they can detect the presence of cesium. Now, cesium 137 is one of the byproducts of a nuclear power plant. It is a fairly long half-life, about 30 odd years. Now, this is picked up, interestingly, by a German weather station. And you can see the so-called the radioactive cloud, right, going towards the Pacific Ocean. That's in May. And then in July, the wind direction changed, and notice that it began to be blown towards Korea and China. That's why those countries became extremely nervous and started a whole lot of very interesting international incidents. So they were all well preserved, a lot of data been documented. Right? This is from the German meteorological station and others as well. Now, after that, we began to see a series of images throughout the whole world, Malaysia as well, flash from the TV, the social media, right? You can see somehow we conjure your mind, oh, that is dangerous, right? That is something very serious affecting different parts of the society. And there are a lot of implications. You can look at the issues and the consequences from that even until today. So with the health issue, then you have the radiological, right, the release of the radioisotopes in the atmosphere, into the ocean, and the soil, the psychological and social economic, and a lot of mental health issue, ecological issues. There is so-called contaminated surrounding area and beyond. And then also it started the geopolitical tensions with the neighboring countries, like that in Korea, in China, Taiwan, and so on. And most important thing, with very few people have mentioned or studied, it is intergenerational consequence. It affects our children, grandchildren, because of a few main thing is the radioisotopes. Many of those are of very long half-life. That means to be radioactive for thousands and thousands of years to come. So how do we tackle those? Right? So the questions that the Japanese there, the Fukushima and elsewhere, and even for us as well, we want to know, am I safe? How safe is safe? These are the questions often still lingering amongst the people? Am I safe from the radiation? So you can think of the parallel in the pandemic now, right? We also think about, am I safe from the SARS-CoV-2 virus? Is the vaccine safe? So there are similar issues as well. I like to focus on the social media. I did a lot of studies on that, and they create a lot of confusion and mistrust from the mis and disinformation. Now, I received this. Some of you may have. I still preserve it. It's quite interesting. It's an SMS message. Uh, there's no WhatsApp then. Third day after the explosion, uh, this is the message received. I will enlarge this to show you. Now, it said BBC Fresh News. Straight we know that BBC doesn't send this kind of news. And basically, it asks people to remain indoors and close the doors, windows. And this is interesting. Swab the neck skin with betadine, where the thyroid area is, hoping it will block, but there isn't. Where it contains iodine, and then take extra precaution. Radiation may hit Philippines. Please send to your loved ones. So we send to Philippines, and then they change it, send hit Malaysia or Singapore. It's quite interesting. So many of my colleagues consulted me as well. Should they send the children to school? Should they stay home for the next couple of days? Right? So tremendous impact it caused. And quite interesting too. You see some scenes in various Chinese cities have gone sort crazy. Uh, that is around March. I happened to be in Hong Kong visiting, and I saw the news in Hong Kong too. And the rumors said it that because of this radioactive iodine will cause thyroid cancer, so they should eat salt to block it, because the salt, particularly sea salt, contains some iodine. So they were rushing for all kinds. Salted salt is no more. They bought, Chinese who have the salted ducks and geese, also bought them and start eating. So that was interesting. It started a lot of commotion and small riots in some small cities in China. It's quite interesting. Was privileged to watch the news then in Hong Kong. And various hypes came on, the hysteria, create more fear and distrust. You can see you have interesting advertising. We bring good things to life. TEPCO is the one who run and own the power reactor, bring good news, good things to life. That's a contradiction then. And you have various people like a professor like this Hiroshi Takashi. He said inhaling even the tiniest particle, that's the danger. Right? So you can see that, right? People respect professors in general or doctors, and they come in the air and saying something which doesn't have scientific backing. So that create more and more fear. There are many such examples. And let's look at some newspaper headings, like lethal levels of radiation detected in Fukushima, anger over revised limit. They were changing the various safety standards for population exposure. And then you have the Asahi Shimbun, the national newspaper. They mentioned 1,000 millisievert, a kind of frightening figures. And this is interesting. Another one, the Telegraph, saying 1,000 millisievert per hour, right? It's different units, so they're all quite mixed up. And then the TEPCO mentioned about trillion becquerel. When you come to think of trillion, a lot of money, very far, but a trillion becquerel, if those who don't understand this unit of measure radiation, they thought is huge amount of radiation, so they got more panic. And also, you see the other report, a terror for thousands of Brits as radiation cloud makes Tokyo panic. Even Tokyo wasn't affected by so-called radiation cloud at all. So Brits, not only Brits, the British, the American, the foreigners, that all were worried, started evacuation home. So that is interesting. So this is the fear mongering to the media. And more news, right? The South Korea bans the fishery import from Fukushima area, right? Bans fish. Not only Korea, you have Taiwan as well. So various things. In fact, today, right, certain produce beside the fish, like the fruits and vegetables were also being banned, though they were free from any radioactive contaminant, so-called. And the government is trying to put up messages like this: the food is contaminated, but don't worry, the contamination is low. So citizens will be worried, right? How low is low, right? Can I still eat something is contaminated? But what it means is actually of much lower concentration below the safety limit. However, citizens, public wouldn't understand this. And then it's interesting, after the initial first 2 years of panics and no information, no guidance, and the government started this reconstruction phase or recovery, and the last is called the Renaissance phase, right? Basically, to rebuild what? Rebuild trust, and that's very important. There were no timely, accurate information given to the citizens in Japan and elsewhere, right, in aftermath of the disaster. So they didn't trust the government, they didn't trust the scientists or anyone at all. So this is the mission to rebuild trust. And risk communication, one of the major tasks is to rebuild trust. It's important. So there are certain efforts. For example, they have in the local villages and school halls, community hall, get doctors in particular. They're very trusted in Japan. Give information, explain to them, and also they have session at schools and kindergarten. This is where the mothers will be there because they are concerned about children that are going to be affected by thyroid cancer and so on. And the bottom picture shows the reconstruction phase started, so people who've been evacuated could go back to the homelands to rebuild the homes. And you have many examples showing not only just talking, but give evidence, scientific evidence, like they measure radioactive from the bags of rice produced from there, or from any cesium from the vegetable elsewhere, and also show the data with the people, to share with the people. And that is what they've been doing, very effective. And of course, recently, right, we knew that the Summer Olympic in Tokyo, it started the torch relay at the sports complex in Fukushima, started there. Okay? It was planned to rebuild international confidence and trust in that. Right? It's a safe place, right, to go. The tourists should welcome Fukushima and try to get rid of the stigma being, oh, the whole place is full of radiation. And my engagement in Fukushima was interesting. I was invited by the International Atomic Energy Agency to serve in the working group number 4. The theme is radiological consequences. There were altogether 6 working groups. I was very privileged. Interestingly, the radiological part is a small part, measurement radiation level, but the major is that consequence of that. So a chance to work with great psychologists to deal with post-traumatic stress syndrome and other social consequences as well. And we published this 6-volume reports, the Fukushima Daiichi accident. This is a cover of the technical volume 4, which I was working in. And also, we ran certain workshops to train them to prepare for future radiological emergencies or radiological emergencies. I have a privilege to be involved in some of those training courses to look at all aspects of it, from really detecting radiation measurement, risk communication, dealing with decontamination, and so on. And I have chance every year we have meetings in Japan in the Fukushima Medical University in the prefecture itself, and I have chance to visit for example, Minami Soma, which is about 20 kilometers from the epicenter, from the nuclear power reactors. You can see the buildings being ruined by the tsunami or the earthquake. It's quite interesting. There are various detectors around to show the background radiation level. And these are a form of risk communication to assure the public. This is in the schools, railway station, bus station. So they have those radiation detectors giving you instantaneous background reading. and just assure the people, oh, it is safe. The level is not higher than what is expected. Right? They also compare with other cities in the world. Okay, so that is about the scene, the setting the scene, what happened, and after that, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power accident.
Thank you so much for walking us through that. I kind of picked up something you said that initially in the Fukushima crisis, the main aim of risk communication was to build trust among the public. So I am quite curious to know a little bit more about risk communication. Are there other intentions or roles for risk communication in addition to trust building between the public and the scientific community? Can you walk us through a little bit on trying to understand the intention of risk communication, or as well as what makes it effective?
Okay, I'll take you to the second part on something about the risk communication. Uh, it is a simpler way to put it is the exchange of information about risk. This based on the Maslow's hierarchy. As human, we want stability, we want peace. Risk is something unwanted, so there is the exchange of information. And now there is slight difference from crisis communication. And crisis is exchange of information during, before, and after a crisis, emergency, or disaster. So the Fukushima is a disaster, or a radiological emergency. So it's slightly a different action plan, but the underlying principles all laid out in the risk communication proper. If you look at WHO, it defines this risk communication as the real-time exchange of information, the advice and opinions between experts or officials and people who face a threat or hazard. In that case, the radiation, to their survival, health, or economic or social well-being. So it's just a very comprehensive definition from WHO. It continues to say that its ultimate purpose is that everyone at risk is able to take informed decisions to mitigate the effects of the threat or the hazard, such as a disease outbreak, like we are facing now, the pandemic, and take protective and preventive action. So have an informed decision so that we make our own decision for our own benefit. It employs a mix of communication, engagement strategies, and tactics. Now, pay attention to this, including but not limited to the media communication, a lot of them, social media, the mass awareness campaigns, health promotion, stakeholder engagement, social mobilization, and community engagement. So you can see it is just not experts, government officials, or politicians talking to them, assuring them, but it is more than that. And I'll show some examples of this. Some are very innovative. So bear in mind, right, it's a mixture, but there are other novelty as well. And hopefully we can learn something so that we can use it to address some of the issues during the current pandemic. So the goals in communication here, right? To communicate the risk. What is it about? To inform, educate the public. We want to persuade and convince them for something. Right? For example, persuade them about the safety of vaccination, the efficacy of it, right? And to build or repair trust. This is what it is still ongoing in Fukushima. So much trust been lost of the TEPCO, the government, even the scientists. So that is interesting. Notice these three are overlapping, intertwined, right? They are all linked to one another, right? All connected. And there are something called by the 7 cardinal rules of risk communication. Covello is one of the Mahaguru of this risk communication. I learned a lot from his uh, books and his writings. Accept and involve public as a legitimate partner is important. Right? They are partner, plan carefully, evaluate your efforts, and a lot of planning strategy. Listen to your audience. Is attentive to concerns. Be honest, frank, and open. It is important. Right? Coordinate and collaborate with other credible sources. Uh, this is very interdisciplinary. Right? It's not only science, government officials, right? The citizens, uh, and various sectors. NGOs are very important too. Meet the needs of the media. It's important. The media, whether it's the mainstream or the social media, speak clearly and with compassion. It's important. Clearly in plain language, they can understand, and the compassion is important. These are the seven cardinal rules. So when you are planning risk communication in your activities, may not be as major as a Fukushima. It is good to follow those rules or guidelines. That's interesting. There's an old model risk communication, which is called DADA. When you decide mainly by the government or authority, and then you announce, and then later people protest, you defend, and then you might abandon. DADD, DA, DADA. And this is one way, top-down risk messages. You just shout, okay, you do this, you do this. I tell you so. This is safe, but it won't work in today's setting. Right? Today is a two-way or multiple-way communication where, remember, the stakeholder, we share information, we give and take, exchange, sharing concerns, generate new ideas in a round table, and this is a win-win-win situation. Right? And that is so important, right? Not the top-down uh, approach. It won't work anymore. So this is a current best practice in risk communication in various settings. And we look at the flow of information related to risk. Now, we are the public. We traditionally, right, we get information from radio, TV, the newspapers, and so on, right? And then the government agencies depend on scientists or experts, a professional body. So you can see the various linkages, connection for all this. But this has changed thanks to the information age. So yeah, the social media comes in where we are all under the big internet. We no longer have to rely on newspaper for the news or TV, right? We get instantaneous news from Twitter, from various YouTube, Facebook messages. So this have changed the strategy, the scenario a lot. So this has also affected the modus operandi of risk communication. Now we need to understand something about radiation. Well, we can't see, right? We fear. Notice the various images I show you beginning. People increase their fear, and then we filter this information, so we tend to be more negative. So this is called risk amplification, amplify the risk in our mind and our body. So it control attitude and perception. Right? And people will respond to these images and perception as the truth. And this is very true. You look at today, right? The misinformation, the fake news going around during the pandemic. So, and also the advertising, people also make use of this, right? The images, the bombardment of those, so to shape their perception, because perception is reality. And you can see even our children grow up with all kind of imagination. The radioactive man, the Spider-Man, and all these are the products of the radiation, so-called. So the fear continues because we every time read deadly radiation, lethal radiation, is always two word, right? Regardless of even a small amount. And mind you, radiation has been beneficial to us. We go for a CT scan, we go for a chest X-ray, and a lot of users in medicine, in healthcare, right? So people are just fearful, right? But medical or even natural radiation we are bombarded with, they are still okay. But when is it the time people recall hearing something good about radiation, like the good news about radiation? Very rare. They're going to hear of the bad news only. So now, when did radiation become fearsome? Quite a while ago, date back to the in the Japanese setting or elsewhere, the atomic bomb 1945, and then 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima. So we associate radiation with, right, the disasters and or the atomic bomb. Uh, is there a good basis for radiation fears? This has been studied a lot by the sociologists, psychologists. Is radiation deadly? We have a lot of scientific radiobiological evidence on that, and somehow public don't quite understand. They have no access to such information. Now, how many people in the world have died from radiation exposure? Right? Where and when? Do we have information? Uh, for example, thousands have gone for CT scan or chest X-ray. How many of these died because of that? Right? Uh, so that's quite interesting. How the different perspective, different it shapes our perceptions as well. And how much radiation does it take to cause death? And the Fukushima accident, thousands have died from the tsunami. They commit suicide, others. But so far, except a few, those first responders who went inside to rescue, they've died. But we have no known casualties arising from exposure to radiation. And IAEA has some very good information on the different aspects of this nuclear accident. We also comparing risk is important to help us. For example, what they have done, right? You compare the background radiation with other countries, with North America, with other countries in Asia as well. And this monitoring post, I have shown you when I was there. There have these uh, radiation stations at bus station, railway station. There have been kindergartens, compound public places. They continue to monitor not only in Fukushima, the prefecture or the city, village, but throughout the whole country. It's very effective way. But not only that, you don't have to go to the station to read it. They make it available online. For example, they show all those maps. The color, like red color, indicate high level radiation, and they show how the background radiation decrease over time, right? From 2011 to 2018 back to normal background radiation, like you and I are living. They have this interesting website. They give you real-time radiation map. I just got it. Iwaki is just near the Fukushima, the nuclear power plant. I was there as well. It's 120 nanosievert power. Is real below the background radiation. Right? This is taken 10:50 this morning. So there are so many. You can see all these the circles, all the stations throughout Japan. It is very convincing. Right? You can log in the website and can find out. Let's say you want to go to Tokyo and they say, oh, you're worried. Would it rain? Okay, give you weather forecast. You also can find out about the radiation level in Tokyo itself, right? So it gives public assurance. It's very good tool for risk communication to seeing, it's believing. And though they also have those within the Fukushima prefecture itself, more detailed, uh, thousands of those measuring stations, continuous monitoring, right? And one can access this online as well. Right? Everything is transparent, it's open, and there's some innovative approaches, amazing. Now they worry about this radioactive cesium, right, being so-called contaminated the soil, and there are a lot of talks, reassurance studies, but they also reassure and this is from my friend, a former professor Tokyo, Ryuko itself is interesting, Hayanto, very creative. So make this whole body scanner for babies to detect any cesium level. Very baby friendly. They can even play with the iPad inside there, right? And there's a window so the mother can see, right? It's not concealed. That ensures safety. Right? Well, it's unnecessary for radiation protection. Why? The level has been proven is well below the safety level, but it is reassuring to the parents, right? As a communication tool. Look here, put the baby there, and oh, very low level, not to worry. So he designed and created this Professor Hayanto from Tokyo University. Hayano. So he published a paper on this. So nobody had any detectable level of radio cesium. It's interesting. He continued to work with a bunch of international students. You have this real-time modeling tool called this shuttle. Right? They can detect the measurement and store it there. So he got invited students from Fukushima, elsewhere in Japan, from France, I think Poland as well, right? Visit Japan itself and ask them to bring back these tools to the home country and continue to measure. Right? And you can see this right inside Fukushima, outside Fukushima, and in Europe, a few countries, they're all about the same level, right? So it's amazing, right? It's convinced them, okay, after all these years, right, intervention, they're back to the normal background radiation. So, and the students, quite a lot of them publish a paper together. So it's a very good initiative uh, towards a risk communication to convey information, the scientific information, so that they can understand it's a transparent way, and also the citizens to participate is something like a citizen science project as well. Okay, this just briefly about risk communication, and particularly with reference to uh, the Fukushima initiative.
Thank you for that, Prof. Ng. I think you gave us a lot of fruit for thought, to be completely honest. I think you spoke quite a lot on how certain form of risk communication can monger fear, and it kind of got me thinking whether sometimes risk communication, the intention of it is to acquire compliance through fear. I mean, it kind of made me think a little bit about being parents, how we always warning our kids in a way that scares them so that they won't do something that they endangers them. And I do wonder whether is there a way to balance, you know, using fear to acquire compliance through risk communication, or whether because I think, if I caught you correctly, where the higher intention of risk communication would be to empower the citizens so they are able to make responsible decisions that are good for themselves by themselves. And I think based on what how it was applied in Fukushima, I feel like they've used it to sort of promote trust and calm and to allay fears, to alleviate fears. So there seems to be two ways risk communication can be used, although one could be the intention is to acquire compliance so that you can manage a pandemic. But another way could be to empower the citizens so that they can make the correct decisions, and responsible decisions. So that, would you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I will comment on this briefly, and then I'll go on to my last part, some of the lessons we've learned. Uh, Definitely, the higher order is much more beneficial than just compliance. I can think of an analogy of all of us have experienced, like we have wearing of mask, huh? We have SOP. If you don't, you get a fine. This is a lower level, just compliance. We want to empower them to the higher order. They understand why, right? And it's to reduce the transmission rate, and be safety for ourselves and others. So they need to be empowered to understand this is a higher order. It is much more beneficial. Now, let me share with you some of the lessons we have learned, myself and my team, those I work with, and also and others. From that, obviously, there are a lot of things we couldn't cover or couldn't learn. Now, this is from the IAEA manual for the first responders to a radiological emergency. I deal with radiation, nuclear. So now, what they say is interesting, that all serious nuclear and radiological emergencies have resulted in the public taking actions that were inappropriate or unwarranted, and resulted in significant adverse psychological and economic effects. And this has been the most severe consequences of many radiological emergency. They said it in the Chernobyl, and obviously very well documented in the Fukushima accident. Right? a lot of post-traumatic stress syndrome, people suffering, people commit suicide, and other mental illnesses as well. And the stigma is something is interesting, also very cultural dependent. And this manual goes on to say these effects have occurred even at emergencies with few or no radiological consequences and resulted primarily because the public was not provided with understandable and consistent information from official sources. And this is very true of the Fukushima and even many other non-radiological disaster accident. There was something like information gap. People looking, hey, what to do? Am I safe? What should I do back? There's no information from anywhere, radio or TV from the official source. What they get is all the Twitters and all the news, which are not accurate. And also information might be too scientific, too technical. They don't understand what it means, right? And for example, those 100 millisievert per hour, these people will have no clue of what it is. And I think it's consistent information where one agency will say one thing, another agency like TEPCO will say something, and then the different NGO will say something else. The professional society will be a different aspect. So all this add confusion to that. So what this IM manual, even though it's for radiological emergency, it is the principle applicable to other forms of emergencies or other forms of crisis as well. There are some lessons we could learn. Uh, First is the need for transparency, trust, and citizen-centered communication. It is very important. This citizens focus. Remember, they want to know: Am I safe? How safe is safe? Right? All of us will ask the same question. So we're transparent, right? Not only limited to certain group of people. The trust is important. So what happened is they resulted in something called trust deficit. It's in a negative. So we need to build up the trust. And crisis communication should be prepared in advance because no one can predict it will happen. Right? That's why it's called a crisis or so. But even during normal peaceful time, to prepare, right? We never know the next pandemic will happen, the next nuclear disaster. Nobody can predict. The communication gap between experts and the public should be narrow, and that is something I've been working on, very keen on that, how to bring technical subjects where I'm a radiation protection expert and how to convey that to layman, a simple language you can understand, using analogy, using infographic and so on. Not a lot of education as well. An authority to review and improve risk communication, and that is they provide training to the officials, and communication skills of key stakeholders must be improved. And that's so important. Uh, the risk communication is not same as public relation or PR. Many people have misunderstood. It's more than that. It's just not create a good image. Everything is well, but really, you see, communicate accurate, timely information to the stakeholders, right, in simple language and thing that can trust. So that's essence of it. So talking about the trust, we can inspire trust. Right? We are competent. We know our subject well. Become respectful, honest, and open. We don't know. We just say sorry. We don't know, and we find out more. And we show our human side, right? And many of those first responders, I know we work in the same team. Excellent. They are medical doctors. Most are nurses. They were there in the front line working. Just a day or two after that, they were, even though radiation level was very high initially, they risked. But this is the human side. Right? They gain the confidence of people. They stay with them, work with them, right? And using simple language, right? Not all these technical jargons that scientists like us often do, and also explain the consequence or assumptions used. Right? If we assume, we need to explain to them, right? There are a lot of assumption and what happened, and demonstrate your own values. Our values: we value life, right? We value safety, ourselves, our family, and that of community. The other one is attentive, interesting. That many of those doctors have been working for them almost 10 years. Right? They have regular meetings. Remember, those suffering from mental stress and so on need long-term rehabilitation. So they've been working, most of them our volunteers. I respect them a lot. And the words we use, watch out for emotional words. It often can stir up a lot of negative thought. Try to use neutral words, right? Attentive listener to a body language as well. Look at the facial expression uh, and others. Maintain an open dialogue. Keep the dialogue open. If you are responsive, it's not one of, oh, now the crisis over, now it's recovery phase, renaissance phase. We don't, but no, keep on sharing information. It's a long haul. It can't be done within a year or even a decade. Right? So we need frequent communication. Adjust. Right? If certain communication tool is not effective anymore, switch on to new one. Learn from the communication experts as well. And because of my involvement and various, I work with Dr. Lian, a fantastic linguistic lecturer in the English department. We published a paper on health physics, and this is foremost journal in radiation protection. Uh, the Fukushima nuclear crisis re-emphasizes the need for improved risk communication and benefit use of social media. A better use of social media. It's interesting. We have analyzed the situation, how the social media were not properly being utilized by those who supposed to communicate accurate scientific information to the public and the citizens. And we highlight to the various stakeholders in this paper. And in one part of it, to the center, it says it mentioned about the key message from this William Morgan lecture. Right? It's still relevant. There's a need to improve public information, especially in the event of a nuclear emergency, and call for educational efforts, improve radiological protection communication. And then the current call is an appeal to the relevant stakeholders to seriously consider incorporating social media as an important tool in risk communication. So we emphasize to learn this risk communication, the various tools properly, effectively. So we highlight that in a paper. And then it just last month, I got a sequel published to the same journal, or no, submitted to the same journal. Uh, how risk communication strategies can help the Fukushima wastewater decision makers, co-author with David Yong and Jiang Kung Gung. David is a linguist and Jiang Kung is in the media. Now, what prompted us to draft this paper? Because just only recently in April this year, Japan announced they want to discharge this wastewater, which is slightly radioactive with tritium, into the Pacific Ocean beginning 2022. They've collected all this water to cool down the reactor, almost 1 million tons. There's no more space. So that created fantastic international protest, hue and cry. Right? Now, the consequences, it will affect the marine ecosystem we don't know much about. There's no information. The fishery, lots of them are fishermen, the geopolitics, relationship with the neighbors, and so on. So that is interesting. We look at what happened, like the various protests on this decision. What the Japanese government and TEPCO has done, they invited the IAEA to come to the study, and hopefully they will reveal this information to the public, not only to alleviate fear, but really to be a transparent way, all come together to solve this unprecedented, complex problem. Now, what they could do, right? Professional competency I mentioned earlier, learn the effective best practice risk communication from this risk communication gurus self, raise public awareness in a proper way, provide with accurate, timely information. They still need, after 10 years, educate journalists is important, the media on the facts about radiation and health, so that they could report accurately, scientifically, uh, empathetic is important to have the compassionate, right? You and I all, we are part of the community, part of the human family. We share the same concern. We want to be safe. And I like, before I end this sharing, a few people I think I've learned a lot, work with them, Reddy Chan, Abel Gonzalez, Ray Cam, Ryugo Hayano, and Chang Kung Gung, whom I work with. I've in this interesting interdisciplinary field of risk communication. So, as a summary to this brief session, the international community is still concerned, confused, and filled with consternation regarding Fukushima in that disaster. Even after 10 years, right? We are 10 years already, but we are optimistic that we will improve in the future. But meanwhile, radiation myth and fear continue to spread. It is very human. It's much easier now with all our WhatsApp, Twitter, like a bunny born without ears. We thought, oh, it's radiation mutant. And another one, which is going recirculated many rounds for years, and how radiation will cause these mutant plants, abnormal size, tomato, giant cabbage, and so on. Uh, so that continue to stir up wild imagination about radiation in people. And unfortunately, it's linked to Fukushima. Yes, Felicita, that is all about my sharing.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ng. It is interesting. I think again, there's so many questions that have come up. Um, I think
I'll
I
stop share
might
first.
sure you
Okay, I'm
could.
back.
I think we could perhaps start by addressing one of the questions from the audience. We have Pisith from Cambodia. Thank you for joining
Oh,
us today. And I think you talked a lot about various lessons from Fukushima, but I think Basit is quite interested in sort of knowing if there's any main or major lesson that you think could be most applicable in our risk communication of during this pandemic. What would you say that would be? Like one of the main or major lessons from Fukushima that we could apply during for risk communication in this pandemic.
yeah, the principles remain the same. For example, being empathetic is important, and to involve the stakeholders, the citizen, to be part of the decision-making process, not a top-down. Right? For example, the government might declare, okay, we do this and that, and later maybe a protest, they have concern, and then we change a decision or we go back to another one. So that is important, and make that information transparent and understandable. Right now, for example, we talk about the various type of vaccines and even the virus, how it's transmitted. Uh, most information is fairly technical, uh, and people wouldn't understand. Another issue is I didn't mention in my sharing is scientists do disagree, and that is important part of science. That's how we make progress. So for example, different medical experts, infectious disease specialists have different view about certain vaccine, a certain way, should we lock down, should we do this. So there are different evidence. It doesn't mean that the scientists don't know anything at all, okay? But this is the nature of science. So, and in fact, some citizens are confused as, oh, they don't trust the scientists, the doctors, because they have different views. But it's something that we need to continue to educate them. It's a good opportunity that we can see uh, the in this communication is fairly new, though people have learned of it, they might study, but to apply in this like the pandemic setting, I see we still have rooms for improvement. So accurate information, plain language, and engage the citizen as a stakeholder, an equal partner.
That is a really interesting point, Prof. Ng. I think it's true that there is this perception that science is only reliable if all the scientists are saying the same thing. But we know in our practice that even in any field of research, there's always contradicting findings, and we're always trying to advance the knowledge by having appraisals and debates over it. So it is insightful to think about risk communication as well as management of any crisis, and in this case, the pandemic. that it's okay for scientists to disagree, but to have a transparent conversation about it. So thank you, Pisith, for that question. I think as you were talking, I realized that with the COVID-19 pandemic, a good thing that's happened is that I feel that we have. I mean, the science literacy of the public seem to have increased. Everybody knows uh, what uh, an mRNA vaccine is. A lot of people seem to have tried to read up a lot of things on their own, and whether that's absolutely accurate or not, maybe a different topic. But there is an increase in science literacy, and I do feel that scientists have sort of had to step up, and had to rise to the challenge of becoming science communicators and or risk communicators. I think there is a question here also on, is there a difference between, communicating science and communicating risk? And how do scientists, in this case, like the scientists in our audience, could sort of do either of it a bit more effectively?
Uh, there is a difference between the two. The traditional science communications about uh, communicating, bringing the ideas uh, about science to the general public or to other professions. Whereas the risk, as indicated, is exchange of information, particularly relating to the risk, something or the hazard that affecting our life is life threatening, like that of the nuclear disaster or a disease and so on. It's quite a different nature. And also you notice the certain principles in risk communication, uh, about decision making, about the transparency, uh, and also there is an element of the statistical analysis here. We know about how we look at risk. There is a probability of things happening, right? And that is important part of the risk communication. And to build trust eventually, in most of the case studies we have looked at it, right? The trust deficit is the main thing. So how there are ways how can regain trust. Whereas science communication is more straightforward about bringing the knowledge like STEM to people, to ordinary citizens, to increase their level of science. Now, another thing interesting about Japanese society, their STEM generally is very high at the level of science, technology. So that's why, in a way, they could be successful in mitigating that disaster. They have an orderly society, very civilized, so-called. Most people will know quite a fair bit about science pretty advanced. So that's why for us, for example, in Malaysia, we need to use science communication, build up the STEM level. When it comes to a crisis, then it's much more easier because there's certain background already. So that is good. I hope to see the YSN to take up greater initiative to promote both science communication and risk communication. You can invite some of the gurus to give a workshop tutorial, a longer session so that they learn the ABC of it and have case studies and practice that. That would be wonderful.
I have more questions coming from that because as I was thinking about it, so when the Fukushima disasters happened in 2011, were the form of risk communication used already the two-way risk communication, or did they use the old model that you discussed?
Mostly OA, a lot of information from TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, right? They own and they run it. So information from there. Also from the Japanese society is pretty hierarchical, the top down, same as many governments in the world. When the minister decide and they sometimes they don't consult the scientists, so that is the problem. Uh, Without that consultation, the multi-way stakeholder engagement, and this is something we like to see is happening. Uh, it's still not happening a lot. Right?
Would
This
you say that
roundtable
it
discussion.
has evolved a little bit over the 10 years, or has it still been similar? I'm just
Uh,
curious because they do.
because of this pressure from protests and NGOs, for example, this coming at first in April they announced they released the water bit by bit, uh, 1 million ton of the radioactive water, and cost they just announced it, the minister, and protest and boycott. They again, I think they didn't really use riskcom, or they might not know how to use it wisely. So they now, because of this feedback and repercussion, they engage the IAEA, inviting them. I think they are their first visit, so to look at the various aspects of it. Right, they should really think about why people worry about marine life, the fishery livelihood. They should have evidence to show them, to demonstrate, right? The water or its level is so much to measure. That's what Professor Hayandu have done in the early stage. So if they will do this, they will be much better to alleviate this kind of panic or fear uh, in them.
Okay.
So
That's a
transparent
bit,
information is needed. So we can see, for example, the ocean current, if there is certain amount of radioactive water, how would this been carried away to the ocean current and elsewhere?
okay. Thanks for that, Prof. Ng. I do have maybe a couple more questions, if you don't mind obliging. I kind of, what struck me in your earlier, I think it must have been strategies or what makes risk communication effective. You said one of it was to accept the public as a legitimate partner, and I thought that was pretty. It was insightful because I think oftentimes we look at the public more as a recipient of the communication material and not necessarily as a legitimate partner with whom you have a two-way communication with. And, I have sat through some public forums where, because of the mistrust that exists, I think sometimes scientists can be seen as though we are out of touch with the reality of the average man, and that and the language that we use may be a bit harder to understand. What do you think an average scientist could do to sort of bridge the gap and to help build the trust with the public, but also to engage the public more as a legitimate partner?
The engagement has to really come from the government authorities in particular, and of course the scientific professional bodies as well, uh, like the Academy of Sciences in Malaysia is a good example. They could engage the citizen to be involved in drafting policy and discussion because it affects their life. I give you two examples. This disposal of radioactive waste in many countries, in Malaysia as well, and the other one is the building of the incinerator, the choice of a location. Often these are controversial, and we know have been lots of protests and havoc because of that. Right? And one of the reasons is that there wasn't any consultation with the stakeholders together to make a collective decision. Often it's by the officials, right? It's like, okay, we choose this site to build, and then the residents come to know and they will protest, they will appeal, and so on. So it's better to go from that high level. And that come to our part as scientists, and often we think ourselves as pretty lofty, we know more than others. We should be humble to what some of the activities do, like a forum, to involve the public stakeholders, could be teachers, ordinary uh, citizens, uh, because all of us affected by all those. We are all sharing the same planet Earth. So I would like to see this happening where we get more public to be involved, even in our scientific conferences as well. There's no harm inviting them as guests. And this is how we build up the STEM level. We want them to be more scientific literate, and that would be a good move.
Thank you for that perspective, Prof. Ng. I think that's given us some inspiration with having, well, I guess practicing science as well as science communication or risk communication a bit more intentionally and responsibly. We do have a question. I'm not sure. I think you touched on it a little bit, but I think someone is kind of wondering if you have any comments on risk communication based on the Linus Rare Earth Company issue in Malaysia. Would you want to say something, or would you prefer to address
Uh,
it in a more
Very
private setting?
briefly, this is a huge topic on Linus. This is place where the rare earth has some residue which has a very low level of radioactivity, and nonetheless, the perception of public, oh, radiation, right? Lethal, dangerous, harmful to our life. We still can't get over with that. And another thing is that well, I have given advice to various ministries on radiation aspects. After all, I've consulted for IEA for several decades, and uh, it is we, for example, like you and I want to know what is the radiation level at Linus when they store the waste or the residue, they call it. Do we have such information? No, we have to go there to, because they do the measurement. But like the Japan has set a good example. In one of the meetings, we advised them to have the information in real time. For example, right, we can log into the internet and check. Okay, the radiation level in Kuantan is this much, is well below the background level, right? In Linus itself is this much. So is information at a glance, is transparent, everyone can access. And in that way, you can build trust. Right now, there's some elements of mistrust. They think, oh, people think, oh, the radiation is high, it is bad for health, therefore they don't want to release to public. So something that is one aspect they could improve the risk communication part to regain trust or the real signs of this radiation residue. But that could be a topic for the future discussion, quite a lot on that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I must say, I think I tried to focus the talk a lot on risk communication, but I think you also helped allay some of our misconceived conception or preconceived misconceptions on radiation. I think being a medical physicist yourself, you seem to have made radiation a friend that you use for good instead of viewing it as a scary, dangerous um, foe. And I think in some ways, I suppose we can use that in many different crises as well. So thank you very much for giving us such insightful and thoughtful reflection on radiation as well as risk communication. And I hope that it has been inspiring and has given a lot of people some ideas, the public as well as the scientific community, on how we could engage better in risk communication, especially in the pandemic today. So thank you so much, Prof. Ng. Would you have any final words before we call this webinar to an end?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Felicita. Well, I really liked your comments and your uh, various insight into that. You have said a lot what I failed to say, but I would say that the risk communication is fairly new. It's interdisciplinary by nature. You need, for example, while working with Fukushima, I learned quite a lot about psychology from those group of people and those sociologists. We need to come together to think of a solution or a strategy. So to out there listening, I'd like to encourage you to think about those principles and how we could use this for handling various crises we face today. And one, the imminent is the COVID pandemic, how we could help. And we can do our part, each of us, to mitigate the seriousness of that as well. Right? For example, not we don't want to pass on misinformation or so-called fake news. We don't want to be responsible. We will learn with proper science education uh, background, so we can make informed decision. not to trust certain um, information coming along the way, believe in that, and cause panic and fear, and then we forward to other, and we propagate the fear and panic. And I hope this is something that every one of us can do, be responsible citizen. And most important thing is science-based decision is important. And we can see from this episode, right, we have experienced close to 2 years that we really need science to combat this. And not only science, but is allied disciplines like in social sciences, right, and psychology, and others as well. So it is collectively the human wisdom that can help us to come out victorious to overcome this pandemic. So I believe the risk communications have a lot to offer to mitigate the fear, the unnecessary panic among us. So important thing is uh, the message I like to convey to you, right? Be empathetic, be compassionate to all, right? And we share the same planet. Whatever happened to us happens to others. Okay, thank you.
Thank you
That's all
so much,
my
Prof.
message.
That was lovely. And I had a really, it was a pleasure spending this Saturday afternoon with you. And I think you've really helped us have a better understanding and perhaps even some aspirations with regards to risk communication and how we practice it. So thank you very much for making time this Saturday afternoon, and hopefully we'll get to see you again on a different topic. So thank you, audience, for being here with us. We hope you enjoyed it, and I guess we'll see you at our next Science Cafe discussion. So thank you very much, and have a good Saturday afternoon.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you.